part of Christmas has always been, certainly for me, the Christmas crib. I remember as a small child being taken to church specially to see the Christmas crib. And then when my brother and I got a bit older, we used to spend a lot of time making our own Christmas cribs at home. It always seemed to involve lit candles. At least one occasion we practically burnt the house down. But what is the origin of the Christmas crib? I think there have been artistic representations from quite an early time, but the crib, as we're more familiar with it now, in our churches and in our homes, traditionally goes back to St. Francis of Assisi. And Francis was no theologian. He'd been to school when he was a boy, but his attention was much more on having a good time than on actually learning anything. His Latin particularly was very poor. He probably didn't learn any formal theology, but he had a kind of instinct in his later life. And this particular Christmas, 3 years before he died, he had an idea that he wanted to convince people of the reality of the incarnation. And he did this by getting a friend of his, a wealthy friend of his. Francis, as you know, was preoccupied or even obsessed during his life with poverty. But he seems to have had a number of rich friends, and he had no compunction whatever in asking them to provide whatever he happened to want. So he had a friend called John, who lived in a tiny village high up in the mountains called Great Chio, and he asked John to prepare for him a cave and people. James, could we have the first slide, do you think? As you see, even today, Great Chio is very proud of the fact that it is the place of the first crib in the world. So Francis asked for, well, have a look at Great Chio first to see where it is. Next one, James, please. High up in the mountains. Why did Francis choose somewhere so inaccessible? Well, we don't know, but there was a tiny friary there. Next one, James, please. Which is so atmospheric. We visited this friary when we were in Assisi on pilgrimage, and it is the most amazing place. I could have stayed there forever. And most of it does actually go back to the time of Francis. Next one, James, please. And that has preserved right down through the years the place where Francis had the first crib made. The altar was added later, but traditionally this is the very spot. Next one, James, please. And we don't have photographs, obviously, but we do have artistic representations. And there is Francis with the Christ child in his arms. He had real people for Mary and Joseph. He had a real donkey and a real ox, but the baby was some kind of a doll. But people that were there, whether this was just medieval enthusiasm, we don't know, but medieval people that were there said they saw the child come to life, and as Francis had brought the child to life in people's hearts, they now saw the child come to life in his arms. And that was, can we have the next one, James, please? Again, you'll notice the women are segregated at the back there, out of the way, but at least they were present. And that's Francis. In the deacon's vestment, he sang the gospel. There's quite a lot of controversy about whether Francis actually was ordained a deacon. He was never a priest. He felt himself unworthy of the priesthood. The tradition has always been that he was a deacon, and because he sang the gospel at this midnight mass, presume he was. There's a more recent idea that perhaps he wasn't, because it smacked of clericalism, and of course Francis was slightly anti-clerical. So that's the story of the first crib as it was made in Greccio, and it's given rise to this tradition which has spread throughout the church, and now people have cribs in their own homes. Even some of my own family, which would not be churchgoers at all, definitely not. They still light a candle in their window every Christmas Eve so that Joseph and Mary know that they're welcome. So that's my contribution. Patricia, would you like to take over?
Well, from some beautiful images to another beautiful image, I've chosen the image of the Portinari old piece, which I think James has just couldn't download it. I couldn't manage to download a decent image of it. So James, there we go. Thank you, James. So the Portinari old piece is a bit later than Greccio, about 1470. And it's painted, it's a Netherlandish painting. It was painted in Bruges for the banker Tommaso Portinari, who was the representative of the Medici Bank in Bruges. He hasn't appeared yet in series 2 of the Medici, which we're catching up on, and I'm quite disappointed about that, but we've got time. Anyway, it's absolutely dripping. It's rich, as so many Renaissance old pieces are, in theology and particularly in Christology. And I always think that the Christmas story is, in many ways, it's the most interesting for an artist. It's the most challenging as well. I mean, I speak as somebody who can't put pen to paper at all, and was asked to leave the art class when we were choosing our O-levels. It still rankles. But the art teacher was right in his judgment. But when artists are doing the Christmas story, they have to focus on the human and on the divine, and that's quite a challenge. Portinari is focusing on the dual nature of Christ. So we can see the whole Christmas story here laid out for us. If we start off in the top left-hand corner on the mountain, you can just see 2 figures wending their way towards Bethlehem, and that's Mary and Joseph. And then if we go to the right hand, behind the red vested saint, you can see that in the corner, you can see the 3 kings, or the magi, on their way, and one of them actually has his hand up pointing towards the star. Obviously the big figures on the 2 panels are the patron saints, and then the smaller figures are the Portinari family themselves. If we move into the central panel, which is the most important one, we've got the humanity, a focus on the humanity of a tiny baby. He is quite baby-like. It's always interesting looking at Renaissance pictures of the Nativity, because sometimes they've got a sort of baby's body and then the head is really weird. Or sometimes they've got a sort of shrunken, it's as though they've painted an adult, but they've shrunk the adult down. But this one, actually, this baby Jesus looked quite baby-like. Definitely a male baby. If you zoom right in, you can see he's clearly identified as a male baby. As Tina and I were saying a couple of weeks ago, in the Renaissance, they weren't as squeamish as we are nowadays about that sort of thing. And it is one of the really easy ways for an artist to portray Christ as a human person, by showing his male genitalia. But at the same time, the tininess of the baby is showing us the dependence, the utter dependence of that human baby on his human parents. and on human society. He needs protection and warmth, shelter, food. Now, it's quite difficult to see, but in the top corner between, if you went up from Mary's head and along a bit towards the slightly grey angel, is as best as I can describe it, there's a harp. And the harp there is indicating that Mary, it's indicating that this is David's house in Bethlehem, the harp being a symbol of David. And so again, it's indicating the human genealogy of Jesus, the child of Mary, the descendant of David, of King David. And in fact, the building has been interpreted as the ruins of David's palace in Bethlehem. That's what the artist Van der Roos was imagining as he's painting it. And yet, if you look at the baby, he's not in a crib or a manger. The manger's behind him, but he is on a sort of bed of radiant light. He's surrounded by angels. There's 9 on the ground about him, and there's 6 floating in the air, always in multiples of 3 angels, because 3 being the number of the Trinity. And of course, as we all know, the medieval period loved the imagery of numbers and numerology. No, Jan, the harp is really difficult to see. You have to kind of zoom right in, and even then it's quite difficult. It's a bit dark and dingy, but it is there. We've got one right in the top right-hand corner of the main panel announcing the news to the shepherds. And we have to remember that the panel is it's lots of little panels at once, so there's lots of chronological events going on together that aren't actually contemporaneous. So there is the angel announcing the good news to the shepherds, and yet here they are in the foreground of the image, coming to adore the Christ child. And last but not least, and again it's very difficult to see, so if we look at the grey angel above the ox and the ass, and I'm sure Patricia Ramsey can tell us more about the role of James, the Proto-Evangelium, in the ox and the ass. Between the grey angel and the ox's horn, there is a sort of, you can just about make out a scowling angel, Lucifer, come to check out this wretched baby who's going to be the downfall, the final, ultimate, eternal downfall of Lucifer, like Dante now. But one of the fascinating things about this image in particular, so far, you know, we've got the angels, we've got the shepherds, we can see the wise men wending their way, and there's life, Netherlandish life going on all about us. But the artist has taken this even further. So we have the baby, he's human and he's divine. Otherwise, if he weren't the divine baby, the Christ child, why would Lucifer be there? So this is a human and divine baby who at the same time is the celebrant at the Eucharist, or the victim at the Eucharist. So we have the Easter baby, the Easter Paschal sacrifice, if you like, in there as well, and that's again a very common motif in the in Renaissance nativity scenes. The angels in the foreground on the right are vested for Mass. The first angel with the red and gold chasuble has, you can't really see it very clearly until you go right in, but the gold, what's it called? The gold edging has the word Sanctus along it. The angels in white on the left are dressed for Mass in the alb and amice and the cincture. And I can't remember, I'm sure somebody else can remember, all these liturgists, what the panels of fabric are called, but they're typical of the period. Behind the angel in the chasuble, we've got angels in dalmatics. In the foreground, we've got wheat between the two rows of angels, and the vase of flowers has grapes on it to indicate the bread and the wine for the Eucharist. And I'm pretty sure, but I'm happy to be corrected by a liturgist, that the two angels in kind of grey-blue at the back are also having some kind of, not ministerial role like the ones at the front, but serving role, because they too are dressed in an alb and with an amice. So what we have here is this amazing image of the human Jesus, who's also the divine Christ, who's also perpetually with us in the church, in the sacrament of the altar. Thanks, James.
Well, I think we've reached a deadly silence. The interesting thing about the icon of the Nativity, of course, is that it looks something terribly alien to us. We don't. I don't know how we could easily put it up on screen, but it looks a tremendously alien thing. It's a desert scene, and there's the infant wrapped in swaddling clothes, and Mary. Joseph is not in the scene. There is an ass and an ox. But of course, the curious thing is that the icon is actually relating to a 2nd century text called the Proto-Evangelium of James. It's one of those texts that we like to imagine are absolutely dreadful apocryphal texts, and God forbid that we should rely on them. And yet, of course, all the stories in the icon of the Nativity are absolutely central. Yeah, thanks, James. You can see immediately that it's in a cave scene. The cave is first mentioned in the Proto-Evangelium of James. It's deliberately taken out. There's two theories about the Proto-Evangelium of James as to why it originated. The first is that it is an attempt to reconcile the two accounts in Matthew and Luke. And in order to reconcile these two irreconcilable accounts, it has to take the birth out of Bethlehem, and it puts it out in a cave near Bethlehem. And you can then make all the different parts of the two gospel accounts come into some sort of apparent harmony. The other theory about the origin of the Proto-Evangelium of James is that it's part of the development of Jesus is the utterly wondrous figure. The humanity is almost seeping into the background. And not only is Jesus becoming the utterly wondrous figure, but everyone around him is becoming wondrous. So Mary is the wondrous figure. And of course, the Proto-Evangelium of James is the first text that treats Mary not only as having a virgin when she has her firstborn, but indeed as the idea of ever virgin. And you can see that down in the bottom right-hand corner. They're the two midwives, and of course one midwife doubts the virginity, and in the Proto-Evangelium she then decides that she will test for the virginity, and her hand withers. In the other bottom corner, you see the devil in the black guy standing up, and he's trying to put bad ideas into Joseph, and Joseph isn't present at the birth in the Proto-Evangelium of James. He's off actually building houses. It looks so alien, and yet only a few days ago the Western Church celebrated the presentation of Mary in the temple, derived directly from the text behind this. We all we still celebrate the feast of Joachim and Anne, derived from this story. We constantly refer to Blessed Mary, ever Virgin. Again, a notion derived from this story. So I'm always intrigued when I see the Nativity of Christ. It's not called the Nativity in Greek, it's called the Genesis, the generation of Christ. At one level, it looks utterly exotic. And it does bring us into this very strange 2nd century text that Western Christians have not openly read since the Reformation. And indeed, Catholics have been very chary of reading since the Reformation, because it appeared to agree with the Reformation claim that Catholicism had been defiled by an admixture of legends.
And yet
it's so much of its theology is still standard RC.
And it's where all our Christmas imagery comes from as well.
Yes.
And I used to have great fun teaching. I used to make the students read the Proto-Evangelium of James and argue that it should be included in the New Testament. That was one of the tasks I used to set my second-year students. And they really enjoyed it, actually, after the initial whinging. They enjoyed reading it, and they recognized all the stories, because all the stories are part of what we tell the story of at Christmas.
Well, it's one of those tales that if you, no matter what group you bring it to, it may suddenly they're both familiar with it and they're appalled by it. Anglicans tend to treat it as just one more part. RCs get shocked that this is the first time you can see the development of the cult of Mary. Evangelicals find the whole way it presents the temple, that the idea that Mary could enter into the centrality of the temple, just no matter who you are, it's the text that annoys you, that can annoy you most.
What I think is ironic about it is that it's given birth to at least 4 feasts in the liturgical cycle of the year, and yet quite early on it was, if not actually forbidden by the church, certainly frowned on very, very firmly, and yet we carry on celebrating these feasts year after year.
Well, of course, one of the reasons for that was that the actual story survived far better than the text survives. The stories become ubiquitous, but we forget where they go back to. And in fact, in 1971, when the new breviary, the new Roman breviary was being promulgated, they were so worried about the feast of Joachim and Anne that they actually tried to make out that, well, the earliest text is the Proto-Evangelium of James, but there may be 1st century traditions that it's a thing. And of course, that misses the point. It's the Proto-Evangelium of James needs to invent this backstory to present its very, the humanity of Christ is almost just a joke within it. It's no more than an interface. The divine, for us poor people, has to put on a face that we can see it. So it's if you don't like the text, it's docetic. If you do like the text, you call it ontological sacramentalism, which is just a posh way of calling it docetic. It actually not only the interesting thing is that not only does Jesus cease to be a genuine creature in history with a historical biography as a human being, but even Mary ceases to be really a historical being. Maybe the icon serves another purpose at Christmas. It should warn us about how difficult a good theology of the incarnation is to create.
I have a question, actually, and that is just to say that you'll know from a from an Eastern point of view, an icon, as we've spoken about in earlier sessions, is an object for veneration. And I'm actually wondering how a Western Christian approaches the crib. I mean, is its purpose simply to stir up sentiment, vis-a-vis the sort of divine action in the crib, or is it does it become an object of devotion similar to an icon?
I think there's a wide range. I'm intrigued going around Catholic churches at Christmas, how the crib has become almost a catechetical aid in some places. For instance, under the table, in several churches, they've taken it and they've put it underneath the table for the Eucharist. So partly that's just confusion. You're turning the whole thing into a performance, and that's seemingly the best place to see everything. So since the best place to see everything, you put it there. That's treating the liturgy as a mantelpiece. You put all your cards up on the mantelpiece. What is a mantelpiece for? It's for displaying all things you want people to see. So the Eucharistic table is there, so you put that there, and all it is now something that you look at, and then you talk it through as if it were this business that you treat Christmas as a matter for the 7-year-olds, and you say, and now children, can you see Jesus? Can you see Joseph? Can you see the thing? And it becomes a sort of a Bible study visual aid. And then people see, oh, isn't it lovely? And it becomes a stirrer of emotions. But in the days when the rubrics forbade anything that wasn't allowed by the rubrics to be within a thing called the sanctuary, the crib was always off to one side. And there it actually became a place of devotion, because there would have been a tray of candles, these things you see, you put in your coin, you pick up a candle and you light it. So it actually became a place of devotion, and it became a place of devotion to the idea of God with us. And I think that's far healthier, because it now functions as an icon for what we are celebrating, and it becomes the focus of celebration. We're actually celebrating that God is with us, rather than running a class on, let's do a Christmas Bible study, and so we'll all know the story. Or even worse, this is Christmas, so you expect to see the right decorations. So we've got holly in the windows and a crib just in front of the Eucharistic table. So I think it's an area where we need to be doing some hard thinking.
That's really helpful. It also answers the question that I was sort of getting at with respect to the form of devotion. In other words, I mean, in the East, it's very obvious how we approach the icon. It is kissed. you would cross yourself and render veneration to the person or thing portrayed. Whereas in the West, if somebody sort of almost makes internal pilgrimage to the crib and then lights a candle, they're doing effectively the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the other interesting thing is that years ago, if you had a crib, you always made sure that people could reach the straw, because people actually used to take a strand of the straw and put it in their prayer books. It wasn't a widespread thing. It wasn't like Palm Sunday or collecting the ashes, but you would see people taking a strand of the straw, and there it had actually become an object of devotion, insofar as that you then wanted to own a part of the devotion, in that you took a piece of straw.
That's interesting, because in Celano's account of Francis making the first crib, he says that the hay that was used was kept, and villagers from round about took the hay back home, and if they had sick animals, if they gave them this hay to eat, they got better.
That idea that anything that touches the holy is medicine is of course a central medieval idea. Bede recommends eating bits of manuscripts as a cure, and you can actually find manuscripts with dog ears, and I've often wondered, is that because they were wrongly cut, or were they actually torn as medicine? If you find an untrimmed medieval manuscript, you'll often find that there's gospel manuscripts, you'll often find corners gone, and they were probably taken in the same way that we would buy. Bede says fragments of gospel manuscripts are good for headaches. Now, so you wonder when you find a gospel manuscript with a tear on it. I don't mean sort of deluxe manuscripts that everyone looks at, but if you call up a gospel manuscript in a library, you'll find tears sometimes, and you wonder, was that sort of aspirin in the 9th century? And again, it's interesting that this idea that the crib is a place of devotion to the Christ. It's not a story about the Christ that we want to recall.
Thanks very much for that. I'm aware that we've got 2 additional comments or questions. I've invited Anne Moynihan to unmute, and I'll just ask her to come forward and put her question to us.
Hi, it's not so much a question. It's just really an observation about the idea of the santons in France, which are essentially extended cribs. It's not just the stable and the Christ child and the immediate participants, but there are figures of the whole village. There might be a windmill, and the miller is outside, the haymakers, the baker, the whole village is there. And I really quite like this as a representation of the whole community, almost as Thomas is saying, coming out in devotion and gathering round, and also feeding into what he was saying about people taking the straw. When Paul and I used to build the crib in Addiscombe in Croydon years ago, when you came to take the crib down, you would find money under the Christ child and little notes to Jesus, and prayers, and at midnight mass, huge crowds at the end of mass would go and stand in front of that crib. And I mean, it was quite sizable. It was contained, but it was quite sizable, but it was definitely an object of devotion.
Like the French cribs, you also get Italian cribs that have exactly the same kind of community all around it, and it becomes a sort of a sign of the local church devotion.
Yeah.
And of course, in some Italian cribs today, you can see the guy making pizza, because the pizza man has to be involved as well. And to my mind, that's absolutely wonderful, because it's a celebration of the presence of the Christ in our world, where we do eat pizza. It's not an attempt at doing a little bit of sort of biblical archaeology and saying, well, now what would it have looked like? What would it, you try to get, you try to do as if it was a historical drama, and put in the right hills for Bethlehem and all that. That actually misses 2 points. It misses the first point is that we're celebrating today the incarnation of the Christ in our universe. We're not just merely doing a historical, hey, guess what happened? It's not sort of like Jesus 2020 and a recollection. And secondly, also, it allows us to realize that even in the gospel accounts, we're dealing with, in the correct, and I'm using the word in the sense of Rudolf Bultmann, we're dealing with myth. We're trying to make something that is greater than our minds can understand, understandable to our minds. It's not that, it's the opposite of Docetism. Docetism is that God is making himself understandable to us. Myth is that we are seeking to appreciate the divine and the mystery that the Holy One is also an infant with us.
We've got Janet Lash, who's made a comment that I think relates closely to what's just been said. So I'll just ask her to come forward, please.
Yes, well, sorry, I missed something because somebody phoned me in the middle, so I missed the last few minutes. But I was thinking about the Italian cribs, where every village, in fact, we were in Rome a few years ago, and in Casa Gandolfo, there was a great crib exhibition in the crypt of the church, and everybody was following it, and there seemed to be competition. I think there was a prize crib at the end of it, and the cribs were all showing aspects of local life. And it struck me that one of the interesting things is, if you read the medieval mystery plays in this country, there's that sense of the Christmas story being incarnated in the ordinary lives of the people. I mean, as in the second Shepherd's play where it's about sheep stealing, and it's gloriously earthy and funny, but also extremely reverent.
I don't know whether John Griffiths is still listening. Do you remember, John, in 1982, we put that play on in All Hallows as part of a nativity, as part of a carol service. And I remember you had to play the Virgin Mary in the play. John Griffiths in? John Griffiths listening? Oh, he must have slipped off.
I'm on mute, Tom.
Ah, John, unmute. Do you remember doing that? We did the Shepherd's play.
Yeah.
In All Hallows. And we had Tarcisius Mukuka, I think, as Jesus. You as the Virgin Mary. I remember Colm Hayden was involved, and I luckily was the producer. I was the only one who could stand over to the side and not expose myself to the laughter. But those medieval mystery plays, if you want to dig something out and use over Advent or Christmas, the medieval mystery plays are eminently usable. Do you remember all that?
I do, Tom. Yes, I do, Tom.
We did it much to the annoyance of both of the professors of scripture, who were very eminent. One is still alive, the other has gone to his reward. But they were both shocked that we were doing this, but we did it.
Listen, I think I see that Patsy has asked a question that brings it round to a sort of a pastoral issue that I think we're all presented with. Now, in light of what we spoke about in the post-COVID series, it could be that there are some answers to be mined there, but I'll just ask her to express her concerns for us.
I was just wondering whether this year anybody will be touching a crib or taking straw from a crib or any of those things which have become part of the traditions.
Yeah, I will, because I have a crib just downstairs, and I can even get you the figures I'll be putting into it now and show them to you. And remember, there was a brilliant cartoon on a German website a couple of days ago, and it has the devil shouting up at God, "Oi, I have just closed down all the churches. Your move." And God shouts back, "I'm not worried. I've just been opening hundreds of thousands of domestic churches." So the answer is, if you haven't, this, we think, the crib, okay, great to have it in the church, but it's actually, if the Christ isn't in the domestic church, so what? So yes, you can touch a crib. I've got one just outside this room, and if you don't believe me, I can actually go and get the figures and show them to you.
But I think the crib is it's going back to what James was saying. The crib is a focus for domestic prayer and domestic contemplation at any time of year. I always, because I'm always running around at Christmas wondering about what I'm going to cook for the next meal. I don't always have time to go and contemplate in the church, but I do spend a lot of time next to the crib that we have, or one of the several cribs that are about.
Please don't laugh at these, because I carved them myself.
Oh.
And there's the three kings from my crib.
Lovely.
John has a question.
Referring back to last week's session, would this not suggest that in the domestic church we should only place the crib out just before Christmas, say on Christmas Eve? Sorry, I've got to carry this out because somebody's just rung the doorbell. But, so that it could genuinely be a kind of liturgical action at Christmas.
Oh, but I have great fun with ours. So Mary and Joseph will start their journey tomorrow, wending their way around the house. The kings will start their journey as well, and everything is eventually there at the right time. So they arrive in time for Christmas, and then the kings arrive in time for the Epiphany. And if it hasn't been destroyed by my friendly cats, it stays up as long as I can manage. So I think yes.
John Kelly has an interesting question that brings us to what happens in, for example, the schools. So, John, if you're able, could you? Yes, you are on. You are able to speak. So, if you would, please.
Just a reflection that. Sorry. Just that reflection that so often we have to sit through nativities in the schools, which are on space rockets or in pop concerts, and quite painful for us older people, but perhaps a bit like some of the mystery plays of old.
John, if I could respond to you, I actually, I've never been offended by what I've seen in my own children's primary schools, but I have to say that I think sometimes those performances depart far enough from the story that even the children are confused. And it seems to me, I mean, I'm no expert in medieval mystery plays, but it does seem an important feature, or an important enough feature that the what is depicted somehow connect to the essence of the story being celebrated. So it seems to me that in pastoral terms, it would be helpful if the schools themselves considered the proximity of the depiction as they undertake it to the essence of the story being depicted or being celebrated.
Well, maybe one of the things we should do is we should actually take out some of these mystery plays and seek how easy it would be to convert them into contemporary texts. It's very, anyone who has ever been at a medieval mystery play will notice just how they were designed to make sure that everyone got a part. They are designed to, this is liturgy in the round. And it's so tempting for liturgy to become performance and audience that maybe we should be digging these things out. Like for instance, I'm always intrigued on Easter Sunday morning when we read the sequence Victimae Paschali, which no one knows what to do with. And of course, the fact is that it's actually the tail end of a whole performance, which was in a world where the Eucharist was beyond understanding. There was another liturgy taking place, which actually involved people, and which then interacted at the sequence. And maybe we need to be, maybe one of the things we should be doing is digging out these medieval plays and not looking at them just as examples of early theatre or examples of the part of the history of the English language, but we should be looking at them as a resource for contemporary liturgy.
I see we've got a few other comments that have rolled in, but I'm just wondering if we might draw our conversation to a close this morning, because I'm sure it could continue for some time to come because of the points being made. Is there a last word that is pressing on anybody that they wish to set forth? And if not, Tom?
Well, nearly everything that's written on Advent is written for teachers and clergy and liturgists so that they can use it in either the school or the parish hall or in the church. This year, we're going to be severely restricted in our contact in all three of those places. So actually one of the challenges that we have as people who are interested in liturgy this year is to translate all that material in such a way that it can be used by people in their houses and with whatever bubble their family is in, or if they're, I'm sure we're all aware, we've all become experts on bubbleology in the last few days, and we're going to become more experts of it in the next few weeks. But actually the challenge for liturgists this year is not what they'll do in the parish church or what will happen in the school. The challenge is how we will help our brothers and sisters do it in their own homes, in the bubble they're in, staying safe.
I think that's a brilliant way to wrap up, and something that is entirely consistent with what we've been exploring together as a group, beginning with the sessions we had on liturgy in the wake of COVID. I think we're all encouraged to celebrate as well as best we can domestically, and between what we discussed last week and this week, it sets us up well for the season that begins in the West tomorrow and in the East today. So thank you.
I think the other way around.
Philip's fast on the Julian calendar. Philip's fast begins today. So.
Oh right, okay, because we begin at 6 tonight. Yeah.
If there's anything that we
need... you've got too long an Advent. That's your problem out in the East.
Well, I'm not going to disagree, but yes. Thank you to both Patricias for the beautiful presentations on Greccio and then the painting, respectively, and to Tom for leaping in for my failure to produce the nativity icon very quickly, and to all of you for being here and for asking the questions you have. So we look forward to carrying this on. I hope that you will be able to participate in the book launch on Monday. I will send out the link for that presently. And we just very much appreciate everybody's participation.